Hello and welcome to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft, and welcome to Modelling for Beginners with me, Jen. So the idea of this series is to bring you a multi-part set of videos that follow building this kit, the Airfix 1/72 de Havilland Mosquito PR16 from start to finish, and covering all the techniques used therein. I'm hoping to keep the videos relatively short to make them easier to follow for you, and what I'd really love is if any of you would build along actually with me. Go out, grab this kit and follow along, and I'll make an album up on the Facebook page for this inaugural Modelling for Beginners series. I do hope actually to add to this with future builds. So the kit, I've chosen this kit for several what I think are pretty good reasons. This kit was designed from the outset to be accessible for beginners by Airfix, both in the way that the kit's been produced and the way that the parts are done, and actually in the instructions as well. So that's why I've picked this. It's not so simple that you're not going to pick anything up. You know, if I chose a quick build or a very simple 70-second fighter build, I think maybe the opportunity for tips and tricks might be a little limited, but we'll see. So here's the kit. So the first thing you need to do, having got your kit, is go inside, and first and foremost just have a quick check to make sure all the bags are sealed and everything's there. Okay, this is open because I opened it, already had a look, but just grab. I've actually just been bitten by this on another build where I've got so far in and discovered a part missing that I didn't notice initially. And it can be a real pain. Most manufacturers will supply replacement parts, but it can be a real pain nonetheless. So just a quick visual of each of the sprues. See if anything stands out as being awry. Two matching ones there. Make sure you've got all your parts. And everything looks ship shape, or mosquito shaped if you prefer. Okay, right, after that, let's just box those back in there. We don't need the bag anymore, get rid of that. So once you're happy that all your parts are there and everything's in good order, we need to move to the instructions. Planning. So planning is such an important part of every build. It's a bit boring, I know. This being an artistic hobby, we don't really want to put boring things like planning into the process and ruin the flow. But nothing ruins the flow quite like making a mistake because you didn't plan ahead. So you just need to have a quick look. So first and foremost, we start at the back with the colour schemes, because you'll need to know, with the majority of builds, you'll need to know from the outset, or at least during the build, which colour scheme you wish to do, if indeed you're doing one that's in the kit. We are this time. We're going to do this one, this American marked Mosquito from the 25th Bomb Group in Norfolk in 1944. So scheme B. Then we're just going to have a look all the way through the instructions. You can be as detailed or otherwise as you wish, as befits your experience level. Have a good read, a good check through, make sure you understand what's going on. But primarily what we're looking for is anything that needs to be specific to the build that we want to do. I do not think, if memory serves, that there's anything in here which is specific to scheme B. This does seem a very big and long instruction booklet for what is a relatively small and simple build, but that's because everything is replicated for each engine, each undercarriage leg, and so on, rather than the usual build this twice or two lots of numbers for each one. Okay, so the only place we need to worry about versions and be specific about what we use is this step here, step 99. You could mark that if you wish, put an asterisk on there, or a bit of a coloured pen or something, just to remind yourself. But this is not going to be a big issue because this is a separate part that fits on. So that's it. Quick check of the instructions. Make sure everything's there. Make sure we know what we're dealing with going forward. So for these A4 booklets, what I tend to do is fold it over like so. It takes up a lot of desk real estate when it's double fold opened up, so I tend to use it like that, and we'll get started in a minute. But first I just want to do a very quick intro of the tools that initially at least are going to be used. They're very basic. First and foremost, nippers. You need nippers to take the parts off the sprues. I remember back in the day when I used to use scissors to do this. I've even used nail clippers at various times in the past, but in order to avoid damaging parts and to make clean cuts, what you really need is nippers. There are a myriad of different nippers out there. These are Tamiya, and these are the fine pointed version, and I do recommend, if you're going to buy nippers specifically for modelling, that you get this fine style, because they do cut much more neatly, much more discreetly, and just generally much better than the larger ones. Here's another type. This is the DSPIA nipper, which is a single blade. One of these blades, this one, is just a stop. It doesn't have a cutting edge, so it only cuts from one direction. But as you can see, again, they're very thin. I would recommend a thin bladed cutter. They aren't the cheapest tool, however, even the amount of use that they get with me, these will last a year or two without any issue. So even though they're sort of £25 to buy, if you factor into that how long they're going to last, it's not the end of the world. Tweezers. These are just cheap ones from Amazon. I will try and remember to put some links below for some of this stuff for any of you that really are starting out from the beginning. They do have a nice fine point, which I refine by use a bit of wet and dry and just sand the inside of the end of the tweezer so they meet together nicely. These were part of a set. I think I got 10 tweezers for about £9, so they're very cheap. Next, a scalpel, some kind of cutting device. This is a Swan Morton number 3 handle with a number 11 blade. This is what I use for the majority of my cutting work. I've owned this scalpel handle since I was a kid. It's really old. I'll go no further with that one. There are other types, the Exolite style. There's various types. Use whatever you're comfortable with, but a good quality blade is important. And finally, some form of sanding medium. I see a lot of people using files. That's fine, but they don't leave a very fine finish generally. Again, personal preference is going to come into play here. But this is a Phil Flory or Pro Modeler skinny stick. These unfortunately are not available to buy anymore. However, there are other manufacturers out there that do sanding sticks. These skinny ones are really nifty, really easy to use. Just a great product. It's got a relatively fine grit on this side. I'd say probably a 320 maybe, and then something like a 220-ish on this side. So that's the tools at this stage, and let's have a look at the parts and get going. So the first couple of stages are, let's concentrate on stage 1 and 2 for the moment, simply going to build this kind of core basis for the fuselage, which does integrate some short stub wing spars which are in the same positions as they are on the real thing. So we'll collect the parts first. And then you can see on the instructions that each part number has a letter associated to it. So for instance here we have D2 and D3, and the D simply is the frame number. See here, frame D. So when you've got numbers, letters like that, which you generally do for most manufacturers, you just need to find the appropriate sprue and then search out the appropriate parts. Now Airfix are very kind and they put the numbers in a logical sequence on the frames. Again, Not all manufacturers do this, so you can use a combination of the illustration so that you know roughly what shape you're looking for and finding the numbers. But here are 2 and 3. And they are sufficiently different in shape that I'm just going to snip them off and not worry about which is which at this stage. And notice that I'm cutting somewhat away from the part and leaving a substantial tab, which I'll clean off in a moment. And then I'm going to grab G10 from step 2, so frame G, part number 10. Now that we have the parts for that particular small assembly, I need to clean them up before I assemble them. I've got a whole bunch of moulding stubs on this one, and then I have the pieces of sprue left on these. Now I'm going to do most of that cleanup with my nippers. Because I invested in some good quality nippers, I can actually get some very clean cuts. And here's how. So every pair of nippers has a sort of flat side and a less flat side. You always want the flat side to be facing the part, like so, and you can just let it butt all the way up against it and snip the stub off. Like so. I'll try and do it in mid-air a little bit closer up, so I put the nipper all the way up to the part, snip off the stub. It does pay sometimes to look at alignment. In this case, this sprue stub is very wide in this direction, but quite slim in that direction. So cutting it off like this doesn't really make any sense. The most effective, efficient and neatest way to cut it is this way, and that's why I do it that way. Then the ends of the spars also, this is where the sprue stubs are. So here we have to identify where the end of the spar falls. Again, put our flat edge up to it or close to it if we're nervous. Snip off the sprue stub. Just like that. And these things, when they get on the floor, are the next best thing to Lego for absolute injuriousness to your feet. So finally, because of clearance, I can't do this completely flat, which is what I'd prefer. Just pop these off here. And that's our sprue stubs mostly removed. So to completely remove it, I then switch to the scalpel. A lot of people will use a file or a sanding stick to remove the rest of the stub. Perfectly valid process actually. However, it's very easy to not really fully remove it when you use a sanding stick rather than a scalpel. And here's why. Diagram time. So if this is my part edge and I have a sprue stub, just a small one that's left after I've done nippering, like so. If I then attack this with a sander, it's very, very easy to actually end up with a part that goes like this, where I have sanded until the edges appear to disappear, but the middle is still higher than the level of the part. Most of the time that probably doesn't matter all that much, but a lot of the time, and these are a case in point, that will then provide a tiny bit of interference in the fit of the part to the next part, because it's not completely flat, which is where it would be if it was. With a scalpel you can hit that edge and trim across, and you can remove the whole thing without any fear of a lump, and then just give it a little tickle with the sanding stick to finish it off. So to do that, this is just the way I hold a scalpel. Obviously hold the scalpel however you feel comfortable. You just need to find the edge of that sprue stub by feel with the blade, and very gently remove the remnants of the stub. And you can feel when it's flat, the blade won't catch anything, and that's that done. If you really want to, grab your sanding stick and just a couple of little sands, and that is completely gone. Another item of prep, I can't tell if this is visible in the footage, I'm afraid, because the screen on the camera is so small, but there is a mould seam halfway along this edge, and that mould seam results in a very slight step in that mating edge. And again, these do require, you can hear my blade catching it, but these do require a little bit of clean up. Probably the easiest way is just a light scrape like so, because the blade will only catch the high part of that edge, it won't scrape the whole thing. So as long as you're holding it square, you'll know when it's gone, because you can't see a difference anymore. I hope that's visible. You just need to nip round, just quickly level up all the edges with your blade. Again, you can use a sanding stick to do that if you wish. It may appear that I'm being tentative. I'm not, I'm just going slowly so that you can see what I'm doing. Just a little bit of edge prep. The majority of modern kits do have their mould seams on the edge of the parts, and I think a lot of times when people do have issues with fit, it is actually because of these mould seams that they possibly don't notice, don't realise they're there, but they do often need a little bit of clean up. There we go. I'll do the rest of this off clam, and I'll be back shortly with these parts for assembly. Right then, now the parts are off the sprues and all of the joint stubs are cleaned up, what we need to do next is have a little test fit to make sure everything works as advertised. So with the diagram to hand, I'll keep it out of view because the camera struggles to focus, but this is the front one, and the slot needs to face forward. Just check that that fits neatly on there, and it does. The aft one doesn't seem to matter which way around it goes, but since there is an ejector pin mark on one face, I would tend to face that away from where it will be shown. And this also fits nice. This is relatively tight. You could consider trimming it if you wanted, but that does sit in place nicely. And then finally just make sure this tab fits this slot, which it does. Now here, there's a consideration that some might want to take care of, and at this stage it'll be very, very easy to do so. You have two circles, recessed circles on that front face. Those are ejector pin marks. Now because they face forward, this is essentially, this area here is the floor of the cockpit, and because these face forward, in theory there is the potential that these may be vaguely visible through that nose transparency. So let's go ahead and fill those. Now there are lots and lots of ways you can fill things, but throughout this build and any others I do like it, I am going to concentrate on the methods that I use rather than anything generic. I use super glue and talc for filling, and some might argue that maybe a beginner shouldn't be messing around with super glue and talc, but I would argue back that it's perfectly simple if you do it right, and I'm going to show you how to do it right. So super glue, just get some super glue, doesn't matter what it is. Now I'm going to use this black stuff just to make it easier for you all to see what I'm doing. This is AK Black Widow. There are other black super glues available on the market, of course. Simply place, it does this static thing which is kind of annoying. Place some super glue on a mixing surface. This is just a piece of thick plastic card that I've got kicking about, and you need a mixing tool. Cocktail sticks are ideal, and you need some talcum powder. This is regular, standard, ordinary talcum powder. It's actually this stuff, Cousin's Imperial Leather. I bought it, as you can see from the state of the tub, a very long time ago. Any old supermarket talc would do. Obviously you can buy specific modelling related talcum powders. You could go get medical grade unscented stuff if you wanted. Pop a bit of that on your glue, mix it up. Now the more talc you put in, the thicker or stodgier your mixture will be. So clearly, if you're filling a sort of a big gap or trying to bridge a gap, you want to mix something quite thick so it will hold itself in position. If you're filling a small crack or a small gap, it would make sense to make your glue a bit thinner so that the mixture can get through the gap. You don't really want a tiny thin layer just bridging across the top of a gap, because chances are it will move later on. There you go. I have added some of this black super glue into that pair of ejector pin circles. Now we need to wait for it to dry. You can use accelerator on it if you wish, but it doesn't take too long, so we'll just wait. Alright, so with the glue dry we need to obviously knock it back to flat. Now super glue with talc in it is quite easy to sand, but it isn't as easy to sand as plastic or most of the other filler products on the market. It's similar to milliput, I would say. So one of the things I do to try and minimise collateral damage is actually scrape it or file it down initially. So we've got a big lump there. So this is my other number 3 scalpel handle, and this one has a number 15 blade, and this blade's quite handy. And one of the things it's good for is this. So all I'm doing is just ever so carefully, I'm not using very much force, gently paring down that lump and bringing the level of the filler almost within and that's, you know what, of being at the right level, like so. And then I can grab my sanding stick. We're just using this one sanding stick here in this build, and I'm going to use the finer side. Just rub that across. So that it's all blended, like so. Not done too much damage. It's not too much in the way of scratching. We haven't drastically changed the dimensions of the part whilst trying to get this filler off, or get it level, I should say. Voila! One flat piece with no ejector pin parts. Don't worry about this if you don't want to, but Okay, now we're going to need to glue these parts together. Now with reference to the instructions, you'll see we've got some scrap views here which show the specific angles these bulkheads need to be at. Note, these are to scale. So you could, if you wanted to, create some sort of jig from card or something to allow you to use these as a reference, but I'm going to show you something that's really a lot easier. We're just going to use the fuselage halves. So first things first, let's glue these two bulkheads on. We're going to use liquid cement. The bottle says Tamiya extra thin, I know, but it's not actually just Tamiya extra thin in here, because what I tend to do is top the bottles up with whatever I've got kicking around. So there's some ammo extra thin in here as well, and probably others, but anyway. Liquid cement. So loosen the lid. Right, hold your pieces together if you can, in situ or close to it. Take your glue and just dab the brush against the side of the jar before you use it, because that will remove any excessive amounts of glue. You do not want to use too much glue. If you use a lot of glue, when you squeeze the parts together, what will happen is that a nice line of bubbles of melted plastic and glue will issue from your joint, and most of the time that is counterproductive. So that is in position. It's going to take a minute to set, so I'm not even going to worry about it. I'm going to switch straight over to the other one, push it into place and go along the back, the area that's not visible, just with a nice line like that. And then I'm going to pop the part into the fuselage half. Now, because it's got these spars, that's simplicity itself to line up. And the fuselage half has little slots in it where each of those parts needs to sit. You can see I've been cleaning up some ejector pin marks here. Again, whether you want to bother with this is completely personal choice, but all I've been doing is using that curved edge of the blade and just scraping to just minimise the appearance of them. They're not gone, but they're just not as obvious. Anyway, I digress, as usual. That's in situ there, so this time I'll just pop that floor piece into position in its slot like so. This is going to need more fingers than I've got, I suspect. Okay, so when in a situation like this where you can't easily hold the part in position whilst you put glue, then put a little bit of glue. I'm just going to put some in that slot. We need to work fast because it evaporates quickly. There we go, got that in position like that, and then back in again like before. It's a careful line along the bottom, a little nudge, so visually ensure everything's sitting where it should, which it is, and then we'll place the second half of the fuselage over the spars, bring it all together. This will hold all of those pieces in the correct alignment, and if they were not in the correct alignment it would not close together so neatly as it is doing. And just to keep everything together while that glue dries, a little bit of tape, any tape you like. You do not have to use expensive Tamiya tape for this, but it's what I have on hand. And a couple of strips in the bottom. Like so. The kit is its own jig, as you can see. Everything, you can look in from these angles, you can see that the tabs are sitting in their respective locations. Everything's come together beautifully and neatly. The fuselage seam already looks very, very good, and I haven't done a thing to it. So that needs to sit off to one side in order for that glue to fully harden. In the meantime, while we're waiting, what I will do is go through the next several steps of the instructions. So I'm going to go right up to step 10, and I'm going to cut out, prepare, and where possible assemble all of these other cockpit parts using exactly the methods we've already looked at. So all of these parts, this is all of the parts for the rest of the cockpit right up to, as I said, stage 10, all trimmed off and cleaned up and ready to go. But I did identify a problem with the seat pieces. So the seat is made up of 4 segments, steps 5 and 6. Got the armour plate with the backrest and the seat squab itself, and then you've got these 2 armrest sort of side pieces that go onto that. Now note on the diagram, the inside here where it attaches to the seat base is flat, yes, and that the detail is on the outside of the part, so you know just by looking at it which way around the part fits. Now on both of these pieces, this one's not too bad. There's an ejector pin circle right in that flat area which is protruding. That will inhibit a good fit to the seat base, but it's not terrible. It's probably not that much of an issue, isn't really worth cleaning up. This one, however, this being the left hand seat side, I'm going to get tweezers to hold it so it's easy to see. There's a rather large protruding stub. That is going to make a good fit actually impossible. Any fit at all impossible. So that needs to be trimmed off. And this is, as you can see by my mighty fingers, quite a small part. So cleaning that up could be quite tricky. So I'm going to show you the way I would attack things like this. I'm inherently lazy, so I tend to do things the easiest possible way whenever I can. And I used the nippers. Now this is where things like these fine point nippers really do come into their own, because your big bulky Halfords nippers are just going to wreck everything if you try and do things like this with it. So try and get close enough for you to see. Bring them in just as though you were taking, exactly like you're taking off a spruce stub really. Get it either side. Just be careful. I'm really only using my fingertips to close these pliers. There. Not gonna lie, this pair of Tammy nippers are not as good as the ones I've had previously, and that isn't that clean of a cut, but it's much closer to where it needs to be than it was. Similar to the other side now. So now I'm just going to use my scalpel, just as I do with the spruce stub. I was so careful not to break this seat side part in half. There we go. Get that flush. Just a little trim from the other direction. And there. It doesn't look nice because you can still see sort of the stress mark in the plastic, but that is now flush and will now fit properly when introduced to the rest of the seat parts. This one is far less pronounced, so I wouldn't bother using the nippers on this at all. Just in the same vein, just get in there with the blade. This blade's a tad dull, to be fair, so it's not as easy as it would be otherwise. There we have it. Both trimmed off flush. And that seat will now fit together as advertised. There's not very much assembly I can do on these parts. I'm going to put the seat together and the instrument panel, which I've not actually cut out. There we go, G11. Snip that off. Sorry, working off camera. I'm working basically almost at arm's length to be in the centre of the shot. It's quite unnatural. I'm one of these people who has quite a large bench, to be fair. It's probably about 1.5 meters long by a good 2 foot deep, and I tend to work over my lap anyway. So here we go. There's the instrument panel, and we need the first little rudder pedal assembly. Pops on there. Nice, obvious locating tab with a matching slot, so it's nice and easy. Hold that together. One thing to be very, very aware of when you're holding a part together, ready for gluing with your liquid cement, is that you make absolutely double dog sure your fingers are not anywhere that the glue can touch. Because if the glue can run through the joint and touch your fingers, it will then come firing out, and you'll leave a lovely fingerprint shaped melty scar on the surface of your parts. There we go, that's that together. The seat pieces here. A lot of people through the years have accused me of having very steady hands when they learn that I'm a modeller and they see my work. They always say, "Oh, you must have really steady hands." I actually don't at all, and you'll note if you're looking that I use my fingers on my other hand to steady myself when I'm applying cement, so as not to make a mess. There's a seat base on. Put the sides on now that they will fit without drama, which they do. Slots in. There's a tab underneath. All lines up nicely. Just let the glue run into the joint and then give it just the gentlest little squeeze, and then up the side, like so. And the beauty of this thin liquid cement is the capillary action. You just need to touch the glue brush onto one area, and the capillary will do the rest. There we go. So let's leave part one there. These pieces are all ready, prepped and ready for paint. This sub-assembly inside the fuselage half jig needs to set up nice and strong, so that needs some time. So in part two, we'll paint all this interior stuff and get it finished and put together, and we'll do the prep work on the fuselage halves, ready for them to be joined. I hope to bring you part two quite soon, possibly next week, so that you can get a kit in, get up to this point, and then carry on with me through the build. I would really love it if some of you did that. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. I hope there's been some useful tips already. I'll look forward to seeing you in the next edition of Modelling for Beginners with Genesis Designs and Modelcraft. So with that said, it only remains for me to say, look after yourselves, look after each other. Genesis out.